So thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's event. I'm Emily, I'm one of the hosts here at Powell's. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the coming weeks and tomorrow and the next day, we're looking forward to welcoming Jill McCorkle, August 13th, and Kate Elliott and Kit Roca on August 14th, among many others. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. As well, if you haven't already done so, you may sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Shruti Swami in conversation with Kiese Lehman. Her work has appeared in the Paris Review, McSweeney's, Prairie Schooner, and elsewhere. She's a Steinbeck Fellow at San Jose State University and a recipient of a 2018 grant from Elizabeth George Foundation. She lives in San Francisco. Kiese is professor and writer of 3 books, including Heavy, an American memoir. He's also the author of the forthcoming Good God. In a House is a Body, dreams collide with reality, modernity with antiquity, and myth with identity in 12 arresting stories. The collection introduces her as a bold and original voice in fiction and a writer at the start of a stellar career. So this event also includes a Q&A. You can see that little Q&A module at the bottom. Go ahead and ask a question, and we'll get to that in the Q&A portion of this talk. There's also a chat, so feel free to talk amongst yourself in there. I'll be sharing the link to the book in there multiple times tonight. And perhaps most importantly, please consider supporting Shruti and Powell's by purchasing a copy of A House is a Body. Now please welcome Shruti and Kiese.
Hey.
Hi.
Is this as weird for you as it feels for me?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the last time we really had a conversation, and that was in 2006.
Right. But you know what's crazy about 2006 and that last conversation? I mean, man, it's so weird to talk to you in front of 50 or 60 people. But you were just one of those writers / students who I was like mad jealous of, you know what I'm saying?
No, not
no.
Fam.
Yes, indeed. Anyway, I'm not gonna do that to you. I'm not gonna do that to you. But I will just say, Shruti, your work meant so much to me back in 2006. That is crazy. That's 14 years ago. But reading this collection, I was just like, I was more than blown away. I did that thing where I just wanted everybody to know that I kind of knew you. You know what I'm saying? I started messaging people and shit. I was like, yo, I just read. Oh, and I taught her back in the day. Blah blah blah. But seriously, like, I want to ask this question to start off. I've read a few people write about the book in the last week or so, and one of the things people talk about is like this darkness. And I just want to give you an opportunity, if you want to talk not just about the reading of these stories as somewhat dark, but what does it also feel to see people writing about your writing in the world? Like, I'm asking about you.
So weird. Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, really weird. I think, I mean, obviously just like so strange to have these stories be just like a Word doc and then suddenly like people have opinions about them or are talking about them. Yeah, you said in your blurb, which I really appreciated, you said that it was fun. You called the collection fun. And I think that I'm often drawn to subjects that are kind of heavy. Like I think that I write to work through some of those things and or not work through them, walk through them, and name things that I think that we often use this word unspeakable in our culture, like especially I think when we talk about death, that this is an unspeakable thing. And so part of my job, I felt like in this book, or my interest, was just to speak it. But to me, so many of these stories, as I walked through them, there was my lens was, if somebody was in the situation, where's the meaning in that? Like, where's the pleasure and the beauty and the joy? Because otherwise that's not like a real human life if we're not open to all of those feelings. And actually, in some of the most devastating and deepest and darkest moments, you're so alive to everything, and you can't just shut out one part of that and experience the other. You experience both of them at once. So that was really that was really important to me to think about as a writer, but also just as a person. I think we're in a really dark time right now. Like, I'm
Yeah.
truly the most scared I have ever been in my
Right.
life right now.
Yeah.
And I think that in fiction, in my own writing and other people's writing, I'm looking to see how people answer the question, how do we live? Like, truly, how do we live? And not just putting one foot in front of the other and like gritting our teeth through another day. Like, how do we retain our humanity, our capacity for joy,
Yeah.
and our appreciation of pleasure and beauty, even in the darkest times? Because that's like, I need to believe that's possible.
Yeah, you know, one of the reasons that I thought the book was fun was because it defied like pattern to me. And so one of the things I think you do in most of these stories, it's the beginning of a pattern. Like, you take the familiar, a familiar idea, a familiar trope, and then you make it unfamiliar. But then you do some other things with it. And at first I was like, oh, I get the pattern. But then when I get down to like the laughter artist, I'm like, oh shit, I don't understand the pattern. And I love not understanding the pattern. But I wonder if you can talk about the way you take sometimes the familiar, like, you know, literally, and also in the titles you can see, you know, blindness, you talk about, you know, a brother, you talk about weddings. Do you often like want to take what readers and or you think of as familiar and sort of then like mystify it before you demystify it? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I have one answer that I don't know if immediately, I don't know if that exactly answers a question, but I thought a lot about the expectations that have been placed on me in my work as an Indian woman. And,
Yes.
and actually, I don't know, it's like, I'm going to tell the story because it's an important story to me, I guess. But, you know, when I was your student, we had a meeting one time where you're like, these stories are like fine, but why are you always writing about white people? And I was like, oh, I don't know. You know, I'd never written a story like about an Indian person or even just a person of color and a non-white person. It was all white people. And part of it was this idea that, like, I remember saying this to you, where I was like, I just feel like everybody will think it's about me if I write. And you were like, what?
Right.
Yeah, I don't even remember what you said. You were just like, you should just not worry about that.
Right.
And that was a really important moment for me. I think that saved me like really years of work, because I was not, I was able to just bypass some baggage right there really quickly. But I still think about this a lot when I write my stories. I think that there's an expectation of what my characters are going to do or what my stories are going to be about. And I do think that there's less of an expectation than there was even like 10 years ago, you know, like
Yes.
we just had like only Jhumpa Lahiri. So it's like
Yeah.
either your story was going to be like Jhumpa Lahiri's or it wasn't going to be in that, you know, you just had that one model. And God bless Jhumpa Lahiri, but
Right.
I'm a very different writer than her. So I just feel like now there's more, you know, there's just so much more options. And I also have just seen formally so many more options. But I still think that there's a way that I was really conscious, and especially the stories that were about Indian people set in India and Indian women. I just felt like there was so much that people might bring to those stories that I wanted to be really careful to stay close to that character and not, you know, and not try and satisfy anybody's expectations of what those stories could be, to just let them be human as any other character would be. But that was really, I mean, not conscious on like the conscious on the revise, I think, at those stories that I.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about those old stories. But the skill and the skill and the talent were obviously there, but I definitely wondered why you were writing yourself out of your story, right? I mean, I didn't wonder, I knew why, but like, you know, part of our jobs is trying to encourage people not to write themselves out. But what I find in this book is that there's so many characters who are also in different ways dealing with the threat of being written out of their own narratives. And it seems like they have to find their narratives as the story goes on, right? And some find it and some don't, and many don't, which I love. But yeah, like I really wondered about whether or not you go back to that young Shruti who was writing about only white folks And are you kind to yourself when you think about why you were doing that, or do you put it? Are you sort of, because I kind of beat myself up about shit I've done. Like, or do you beat yourself up sometimes for even needing or wanting to do that? And did that help you get to where you are now?
Oh yeah. I mean, I feel a lot of compassion for a 20-year-old Shruti who was raised in very white environments, and Vassar was really white. So I didn't have a lot of models. That's why creative writing teachers of color are so
right.
I didn't have a lot of models for what that could look like. And I really didn't have a lot of models in like the world of literature either. There were so few of those. So I only feel compassion for that younger version of myself. But absolutely, I think that being able to reject that was it really was like a huge, and it happened like in that class, you know. After that, I stopped only writing about white people. And then I these stories are very specifically, some of the characters have a race and then some of them don't. And then some of their names, you can tell that they're Indian, and then some of them you really can't. And it was important to me. I think that names also carry so much baggage. It was important to me to just not let anybody expect right, I guess I'm just saying what I said before. And in so many ways, I wanted to really just create a space for these characters and center non-white characters that absolutely, came from that.
Right, the centering is crucial. So for those of you who maybe just got on, I just want to encourage you also to send your questions to the question and answer portion of the chat. So you can do what you came here to do, which is to interact with Shruti. I'm going to try to ask some of these questions and kind of mesh them with some of the stuff I want to ask you. One person asked this about, are you planning on writing a novel? And what I want to know is, I want to know the answer to that, but I also want to know if any of these stories, like which ones of these stories can you most likely see as a novelistic exploration?
I am in fact working on a novel. And it's very different. Actually, none of these stories, there's some stories that I would love to just like spend more time. I mean, I'd love to just like hang out with Krishna for a novel. That would be great. He seems like a really nice and fun guy to be friends with. But all of these stories, I felt like, you know, it's like the impulse to, there's like the tightness of the frame and that feeling of, you know, the end where you land, like a gymnast lands. I feel like the ending of those stories, that if I lengthen them, that I think they'll all go slack and feel like jelly. But I am working on a novel right now. It's about an Indian classical dancer and a coming of age story set in the 1970s in Bombay. And also, I'll just hold up my book for a second so that my publicist doesn't get mad at me. It's A House is a Body, my book, and you can buy it from Powell's.
It's just an incredible book, fam. But also titles. You know, I'm so interested in I want to talk about beginnings and ends, and I want to talk about middles, but I also want to just talk about titles. A House is a Body. When did you know that was not just the name of one of the stories in the book, but the name of the entire project?
A House is a Body was a gift from the editor at the Paris Review who originally published the story. That story was called Tinder, which is not a very good title for that. I'm actually quite terrible at titles. And she picked that, Nicole Rudnick picked that out for me and was like, what about this? And, you know, that's kind of the thing. I felt like a lot of these stories, I'm very interested in the body, and I didn't really notice that I was. I think it was sometimes that people over the years, or like when reading the collection as a whole, pointed out that focus, and it's really helpful to have that, because I feel like this collection doesn't have like they're not like interlocking stories or characters. They're really separate stories, and they do have resonances of image and theme, which became more clear to me as I was putting it together. But in terms of like, what's this book about? It's like, I don't know, it's like, it truly is about being alive inside a body. So that title was perfect for that story. And in some ways is perfect for this book, because that is truly my focus as a writer, and maybe even as a person. But I was not responsible for either the title of the story nor the collection, actually.
Hey, we take it though. We'll take it. Amy Lamb, the great Amy Lamb, says, and this is sort of get back to something I was saying earlier. My question is about how does Shruti go about unfamiliarizing the familiar? What are the entry points? How does Shruti trouble the familiar? And I guess if we could talk about, maybe if we could talk about blind. Let's talk about mourners. Can we talk about mourners?
Sure, yeah.
Let's talk about blindness near the end. I just love asking like writers where they were when they found the story. And I don't know if you want to talk about that in Mourners, but can you just talk about like how you kind of defamiliarized what most of us consider like mourning is a familiar thing we all go through. But what did you feel like you wanted to bring different to mourners specifically in terms of like defamiliarizing the familiar?
Well, with mourners, I was reading Anais Nin for the first time, and I was like, what? Like, I was like so terrified by it, actually. I felt like there was so much that she's doing that's like actually like legally disgusting. You know, it's like very troubling. So I'm not like necessarily endorsing her book, I guess, or her work, but there was something so, I thought that she was tracing the line between the physicality of living in a body and letting that open you up, and sex in particular, and the way that opens, and the connection between that and grief. How did I make that connection when I think of any specific story, and that I can't really articulate why that occurred to me so much? I think that just because her characters felt so much so physically, and it wasn't just about sex. Like sometimes I think she's like wandering in some very dark, strange places in her book. And that was really the impetus with Mourners, where I felt this intuitive connection between grief and mourning and joy and pleasure and sex. And I was really interested. So I don't know if I was really consciously defamiliarizing the familiar, so much as that I was like doing something slightly terrifying for me, which was writing about sex between characters, where that's the climax of the story, and that there's something that really changes between them when in that act. It's a form of grieving to be together like that.
And one of the things that I see in Mourners, but definitely all throughout the book, is this it feels like a glee or pleasure in the way you describe, right? So there's this section where this starts, the top of a tiny white tooth appears in the baby's lower jaw, like the tip of the moon trying the horizon. It is not centered, but set slightly to the right. The baby touches the tooth with her fingers, a familiar taste, almost ugly, taste of red. That's the sentence for me, a familiar taste, almost ugly, taste of red. And when I read that, I was like, where were you do you remember where you were when you wrote that particular section of this?
I do. I was actually at the Malay Colony, which is a really lovely writer's residency, and I was there in November. So it was like, it's in this big barn that used to be Edna St. Vincent Malay's barn, and you live right underneath where you write, and then it's this huge, very drafty studio. And it was like November, so cold, like, and there was just this tiny little space heater, and it got dark really early. So I was like, I actually remember I was like, just looking at myself in the glass because it had already gone dark. And I was like in my little hat, I like totally bundled up. I was like in my little hat, and I had like my little space heater going. But that was like a really strange, very austere month where I just read and I like napped a lot. It sounds like so luxurious to me now. This is a really long time ago. I read and napped, and it got dark so early, and it was like always cold, and I was just like reading this very cold book that was set in Iceland. And and I just, that feeling of darkness, and also of looking at myself in the mirror and the window as like sort of the ghostly image of myself, and the white tree behind it, the apple tree that had lost all its leaves, that's like very entwined to me with this story, that feeling of fall and like of that early dark and that heavy dark, you know?
Right. Do you feel like you rely more on different senses to carry you through different stories? Like, do you rely on the smell in some stories, maybe rely a little bit more on like sight or taste in other stories. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, I don't know if I've noticed that I do, although I did actually write an entire novel that is not very good. That was like my first novel that I didn't know how to write a novel yet, and so I learned by writing it. That was about a woman who went blind, and so you didn't have sight and in your disposal. And as I was doing research for that book, I learned that so much of our brain as visual people is dedicated, like the brain is like spends so much of its energy processing visual information, so much of its mass processing visual information, and there's so many more words for sight, and that's just like the sense we reach for the most often. So it was actually kind of an amazing experiment to take that away and then see what's opened. And so many of these senses are so subtle, like taste and smell especially are so subtle and beautiful and evocative, and are hard to use in writing because they don't actually have a lot of words. We just don't have very many words for it, especially smell. The words often refer to taste. So we don't really have that many words, but when we use them right, like you can bring up this like actually physical flair of memory because the way that our brain processes.
One of the things that I think just always amazed me about your writing is because, I kind of hate when people tell people what their gifts are, so I'm not going to do that. But I will say one of the things that I wish I could do as well as you is literally describe. But I think if I had that power, I don't know if I could do what you also do, which is to infer. One of the questions here is about inference. So like, how do you, and generally for writers out there, if you are able to describe so much, people, places, things, sounds, the unspeakable, how do you know what not to say in a story? How do you know what to infer and what to leave out? And what does that have to do with like the reader?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question because I've been thinking about that a lot. I've been thinking about that a lot because I had this confusion. I've been working on this novel for so long, and then, and I'm still working on it, but I am in more of like an editing phase. So I'm coming back to writing short stories, and I was kind of like, what even is a short story? Like, what makes a good short story? And I feel like there are some things that are like tenets of writing a good short story that I just believed and was, and they were things that I don't know if I believe anymore. And one of them being show, don't tell. But because I want to write stories, and some of these stories I think I want to write stories that are wild and uncontrolled and full of feeling, but that doesn't actually mean that you say everything,
right?
But you don't withhold it because you're too cool to have feelings. You're like this, you're like a really strong man and you don't have any feelings, there's some things that you hold in because you can't bear to express them, but they do something to your body, or they do something to the way that you speak. And that's not being coy. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm really thinking about the ways in which I want to respect my characters and listen to them really deeply, and not to withhold anything that's because I'm doing anything for my own ego, but because I want to respect how they would be feeling those feelings and how they would articulate them to themselves. Like so much of human life, I think, is like, we don't totally walk around with full clarity of why we say and do the things we say and do. And when we have a conversation with somebody, what is sometimes most interesting is the gaps between the ways that we understand each other, that we don't understand each other with perfect clarity. And so I think that there's a real balance when you're writing, because you have some understanding that maybe even the character doesn't, but to be honest to that, to hold your vision of that and the character's knowledge, but then to be respectful of the character's knowledge, to not patronize them, not to put words in their mouth, to just let them be.
Do you feel like there's a story in here that you were like least successful at doing just what you described?
In terms of like, my ego was getting in the way. Let me look at the table of contents. Probably there was. I don't know. I think that I don't know if there was really, at least in the drafts that exist now. I do think that maybe I worked some of those out and luckily got to cut out. There's a few stories that I felt pretty good about. And then ultimately there was one story in particular where I was like, this just doesn't feel honest, and took it out. But these stories, I think I wrote some of these stories. I mean, I wrote these stories over the course of like 12 years. Right. So I'm a much younger writer. Blindness is the earliest story. And so a much younger writer wrote that story. And I would write it differently now. But yeah. I do think it's in the collection because I feel like it says what I was trying to say.
Yeah. You know, A Simple Composition is one of the stories that I really love in this piece. And I love it for lots of different reasons, but in my mind, I also was like, oh, this is Shruti just trying to show out now. You know what I mean? Like, this is sort of just trying to be like, I can do some shit you can't do. And because even though we haven't talked in 14, 15 years, I know you're probably not going to say you were trying to show out. But do you think there's ever like literary moments in a writer's career where they actually need to just fucking show out? Like, you just need to get out there and just do some shit that you can do really well because you needed to get through the day. I'm not saying, and the second question is like, should those stories be published? But I'm interested in like, just that, like, I'm getting out here, I'm trying to show some people that I can do some shit other people can't do. I felt that in the entire collection. Definitely, I felt that in A Simple Composition.
Yeah, you know, actually, I think that if I tried to do that, then the stories wouldn't be successful because I wouldn't be listening closely enough. A Simple Composition, I actually wrote a draft of like years and years before I wrote this version. And it was like totally unrecognizably different. I had like very, just the relationship between the husband and the wife was the same. And it was terrible. And I kept trying. And then I was like, oh, maybe it's raining now. And okay, they could go to the supermarket. And it just like wasn't working over years and years and years. And then one day I was like, oh, okay, they're in Germany. And as soon as I was just like Googling physics university Germany, and I found Mainz, Germany. And they had that insane puppet parade, which is like a real thing that Mainz does every year. And they also had they had like a carnival museum, which I was like, oh, how do I get that? And then I was like, they can't go to the carnival museum. That's too much. And then suddenly, you know, then I wrote that story over the course of like a week or something. I remember riding my bike because I was like, you know, when you're like really working on something and it's just, you're like living in it. And I was like, I remember being like, I got to take a break and riding my bike and being like, oh no. And then I was like, oh no, this is what happens with the professor. Like, and then as soon as I thought it, I was like, I really don't want that to happen. And it like has to happen.
It has to happen.
So, but that one was actually an example of a story that I really had that feeling, both with that one and Earthly Pleasures.
Yes.
Those were written around the same time in my life as a writer, and had a similar process of just being like, oh, I just need to keep sitting in this uncomfortable feeling until I figure out what happens. But something will happen if I keep listening. And both times it did. One time I was like literally writing in my notebook, what happens, what happens, what happens. And then I found out what happens.
Yeah, you know, I find when I'm talking to people about writing, that the things that they think are hard are seldom the things that are actually hard. But one of the things that I thought was hard about when I imagined writing this book was because I read this book twice, and like these characters, I mean, they are in my fucking like exoskeleton. Like they are in my body. And I didn't create the stories, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm interested though in how you write a collection that is filled with so many different kinds of people who feel and avoid deeply. And when like, how do you allow all of these characters to live in your body at once, or do they sometimes supplant each other? You know what I mean? Like do characters like come in there and go, okay, it's my turn, and then they move out, and they become less important? I mean, one of the reasons I can't imagine writing this because like I literally don't have the bandwidth to have this many actually meaningful, you know, heavy ass weird characters in my body. And they're in my body now, but they're definitely not in my body the way they are in somebody who created them. But can you just talk about that?
I always want to ask that. Do you feel like they're all different? All the characters?
I feel like, you don't feel like you're different?
Well, it's hard for me to tell. Because I think that I was so close to them that I was like, of course. I mean, it's also like when you read your own stories, you're like, of course, this is so obvious. Anybody would have written this because it's like so obvious the story because you wrote it. So you're like, obviously, this is how the story would go. But with my characters, I feel like, especially my female characters who are in the first person, which there are a lot of them in this book, I almost feel like they're the same. It's not even that they're the same person, but those first person stories have such a clear diction when I hear those sentences in my head, like the way that voice phrases things. I mean,
Right.
I'm talking about this in this way where it like, I hear voices, which I don't like literally, I guess I don't know. Philip Glass, I was watching this documentary on Philip Glass and then somebody asked him if he heard the music or if he, I don't know what the other option is. It's like if he heard the music or if he was like making the music. And he was like, it's like listening to the quietest, most subterranean river. And I felt like there's been no better metaphor for that process. And in first person, it feels very much like the voice is very strong. And that diction is very particular to that first person I voice. And I think that the voice is really consistent throughout those stories.
I agree.
The characters are in really different situations, and I think maybe they might make different choices, but I feel like there's this like mysterious, like it's like this woman who's like going through all of these different incarnations or different situations and in like ancient India or in like San Francisco right now, but there's some kind of quality that stays stable to me with that.
Yeah. And there's so much confidence, I feel like, in not just saying that, but like being okay with that, right? As opposed to what a lot of us try to do, which is like we write the same odd narrator and then we use the same diction, like, oh, we gotta change the verb use here. We need to use a little bit less active verbs. But the decision making of these characters, though the diction is the same, the decision making is so different because the sites seem so different. And then ultimately, I think you're right. And I don't know if there's that much difference, right? Like the weightedness of them, of their decisions, like always comes back. Okay, so I want to make sure you get other people. So Anita Varma, who graduated from Vassar in 2008, said, "Congratulations! I appreciate what you said about being a terrifying time. How do you keep yourself going when working on a novel in terms of practice and inspiration?"
Oh, well, how do I keep myself going? Well, Kiese, I feel like you are actually writing right now. How are you keeping yourself going?
I mean, that's all I do. I don't know. All I do is write. You know what? Damn, I thought I was just asking you questions, but I just follow different senses every day. You know what I mean? Like in essay writing and in this fiction stuff I'm trying to write. I just give myself different like tasks. And so this morning I was trying to follow like taste, but again, it's just so hard. Smell is so hard, but taste is really hard to do novelly. You know, it's hard to do like taste in a novel way. So I just try to like use different kind of writerly tasks to kind of push myself in, and hopefully that will push me into the story, into the book. What about you?
How do you feel not mired in despair? So mired in despair that you're like, what's even the point of doing this?
Well, see, I just want to stay alive. And like for me, I mean, I literally just have to write to stay alive. And what's interesting about like the way this last 5 or 6 months have gone, Shruti, I don't know if you feel this or not, but I actually, as terrifying as now is, for me, like I feel more possibility. And I always get embarrassed by saying that. You know what I mean? Not possibility that somebody's gonna read me next year and feel some shit, but I just feel like there's more possibility that the structure of the world that created us could definitively change. And I'm not a person who ever says that kind of shit, but but somehow that has bled into my art. You know, I'm writing more shit that has like, I mean, radical possibility is like the root of everything I'm writing right now. In addition to like absolute terror that everybody I know and me might not be alive like 14 days from now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't totally done a lot of writing. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I worked a lot on my novel. And I think that there was something kind of weirdly like, I was like, nobody's ever going to read this. And then that was something that was like really freeing. I think that there's a way, as extremely grateful as I am that this book has been published, this book, A House is a Body.
A House is a Body.
This book has been published. There's a feeling of privacy you lose when your work is being, and you must feel this even more intensely because you've published nonfiction about your own life, very personal stuff. And even this book, which is fiction, charts a very emotionally, like a very autobiographically emotional landscape for me. But even beyond that, just the idea, and you always or at least I always wrote with this idea that somebody in the ether somewhere in some 1,000 years from now, like nothing that would ever have to do with me in my life, will read it. Because I don't think that I would be able to write something if I didn't actually believe that people would read it. But there is something there was a little bit of a feeling of oh, people are going to read this, that was really strange. And I think that obviously I'm just the beginning of this book being in the world in some ways. So I think that I'm still kind of regaining my balance. But there was some weird thing about the pandemic where I was like, oh, well, who knows how this is going to shake out? I don't know if anybody's going to read this. And that actually felt really thrilling to me. Not the rest of it, but just the idea that it was that what matters, because it stopped being about product and it started being about process. I always I have to just ask her, my friend Shamla, who had this teacher who said this thing where she was like, I think that even writing, if somebody writes in a room a poem, and nobody reads it, but they're just sitting in the act of writing that poem, it changes something in the world.
I agree.
It shifts something. It matters. And I do feel that right now. I think that in the times that I am also scared, and I'm really, really, really sad. I'm in a state of grief for the losses that we're suffering. And as I don't even need to say it, everybody knows.
Right.
And I also do feel this tremendous feeling of possibility that's not a silver lining or something. It's just we're in a moment of just tremendous unknown and upheaval, and that space is opening right now, and we'll see what happens. And we can also make that we can make something happen.
Right.
But I sometimes feel for me, writing is often praying. And I think that me sitting in a room and praying or trying to pray, I believe in that act. Sometimes I don't physically or emotionally believe it in the moment when something's not, when it's not working or when things are really hard. But in general, I believe in that as an act of good.
Yeah. I think about revisionist prayer a lot. And reading this book reminded me that reading also in its most in its most intimate way, and the rereading of lines can feel either what I want prayer to be. Blindness felt like the most devastating prayer in a way to me. And I want to make sure we come back to blindness, but let me get some more of these questions so everybody knows they came here to get what they wanted. Good question. Whitney Williams says, it's a question about process. How did you put the collection together, and which came first? So can we talk about the order? Blindness is first. I forget the last story. Night Garden, I think, is last. Can we talk about why you wanted the book to be framed with those two stories?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really important to me. And through many changes in the book, it was there's some stories that have been, it's almost been fully reconstituted several times, but those stories were anchors for me. Blindness, and I've thought a lot about why I wanted Blindness to be first, and because it's a really difficult story. It's a very disorienting story, and I think the mind, you want to draw a connection between the frame story and the inner story. And and I have a very specific, like, I have a very specific thing that I was doing in that story, but I also really recognize that maybe literally nobody else will will get that when they read it, which is fine with me, because I think that what was really important to me was the idea that it was offering another way of seeing. I mean, there are things specifically that I was doing that for me had to do with karma, had to do with thinking about different, like a different lens on mental illness, and things like that. But fundamentally, that book, this story is about what if there's another way to look at this? Like, not just another, like, oh, what about this little sentence? It's like, what if the way, and in some ways, you know, we're here at Powell's today, which is the stomping grounds of one of my favorite writers, Ursula K. Le Guin. And Ursula K. Le Guin was doing this with her work very literally. You know, she was taking us to other worlds and giving us really incredibly realized alien perspectives. But I wanted to do that with the story in its own way. I wanted to offer another way of seeing through this story. And then once you pass through that story, then you get like you get some like really normal stories after that. You know, I wanted to be like, don't worry, this is a recognizable short story now. They're not all this weird, you know. But I wanted the writer to be disoriented a little bit, and then to reorient themselves, or just feel more open to the possibilities of looking. So that was really important to me to start, and to finish. It just always felt like that was the end of the collection. I couldn't imagine any other way. I think that she comes to a feeling of acceptance in a very difficult moment in her life, and that felt really hopeful to me, the way that she makes peace with where she is in that moment. And I wanted to give the reader some hope, to leave them some hope afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, I think we underestimate the art of connecting to readers, you know, which I think is really different than the art of writing. And I think it has everything to do with revision, and everything to do with sequencing. So, okay, this is a really great question. I'm a hopeful South Asian female writer, and I worry that in the next decade, the niche of South Asian American stories will be all filled up.
Oh no. Wait, sorry, finish the question.
Yeah, right. How do you think you can have a unique perspective when it's rooted in this specific identity?
Oh, wow. Welcome. I'm so glad you asked me that question. Oh my God. I just feel like actually, like, this year, there's like a bunch of short story collections that are coming out by South Asian women writers based in the US. And I think that we're just like in this bizarre scarcity model where they're like, oh, there can only be one. I mean, there's no, like, it's no mystery why that is. It's like
right.
patriarchy, white supremacy, sure. But what's so cool right now, this particular moment, I think within like the last 5 years, I am seeing so many short story collections by Indian women that are just like opening the possibilities of this form, and more voices means more options. And I think, I mean, I was definitely trained in this being like, there can only be one, you know? And I remember my sweet husband, one time I was like, oh, this person is getting so much attention and whatever. And he was like, that means that they're opening the door for you. More of them means more of you. And I am so grateful. And also I'm part of this incredibly wonderful community, Kundiman, which is an Asian American writing. It's a retreat, and it's also, they do workshops around. You should definitely check them out. They're a really great resource. And that was something they really were very conscious about in building community, where they, there's like a listserv where people sometimes will be like, I got published here. And then everybody will be like, yes, you did it. Because there's this understanding that like the more of us there are, the more stories. And also the idea that like, now there's not just Jhumpa Lahiri, you know, like I don't have to respond. I don't even have to respond to her, because even when, you know, even if you're doing something really different, there's always like all the baggage of those expectations. You're responding even if you're rejecting it. And now I feel like there's even more freedom. Like Vandana Singh is an incredible science fiction short story, Indian woman short story writer. Her newest book is Ambiguity Machines, which I'm like kind of obsessed with. It's really amazing. And it's amazing, you know, and it's science fiction. So there's I mean, I'm so glad you asked that question. No, keep writing.
Question. And I think this question is sort of the tag along, one of the tag alongs to that question. It's from a fellow Kundiman fiction fellow sister. Congrats, Shruti. Were there ways that the body, whether yours or the characters, as a space of and for ritual, affected, transformed, or informed your writing?
Oh, I really love that question. I've been thinking about rituals so much recently, and actually been incorporating a lot more rituals in my life. Will you read that question again? I know I can look at them.
You know what? I just took it off, but it was about like the body and like the rituals of body and how that affected, how that affects the stories in the book and you.
Yeah, you know, I don't think I ever noticed that when I was writing these stories. And it's really beautiful that you read that in there. I feel really grateful for that. But I do really believe in, almost more than anything, the practice of ritual. I feel like there's a lot of things that I grew up with that I was like, whatever, mom, you know, that now I'm like, I really feel some really deep meaning to some of these rituals and the act of ritual. So that's really important to me, but it wasn't something that I was thinking of consciously when I was writing the collection.
Yeah, and Mackenzie Smith asked earlier about your relationship to revision as we're talking about ritual. Can you talk about your relationship to revision?
Yeah, although I would really like to know what you mean by, for you, revision is like praying.
Yeah, I think revision is that like sacred space between yesterday and tomorrow, you know, what happened and what could happen. And when my grandmother taught me how to pray, and when I pray, I actually pray to her. And I'm always praying for a better understanding of yesterday or a few minutes ago. But my prayers are often, they have to be rooted in that in order to have some sort of revelatory tomorrow. Do you know? And I feel like the same thing with with revision. Like I have a vision, hopefully, of what I want a piece or a sentence or a phrase to be. And that vision is yesterday. And so the question for me is like, how do I liberate that vision? And that's to me, that's what prayer is to me, right? It's like an acceptance of usually my failures, and how can I be accountable and own like what I have done to contribute to my own self-harm and the harm of whomever else. But also, how can I carry that with me as I look forward to hopefully forming something different? So for me, the revision is like a prayer to me. I never thought about that till today, but yeah, I feel like revision is I mean, again, I'm praying to my grandmother and my grandmother's spirit, right? It's different than some other people who might be praying to something else, but
That's
yeah,
really beautiful. I really love that.
But is the practice of revision like? Because even when I taught you, I always thought you were just one of those writers who maybe pains over the sentence, but like I didn't know if you went back and rewrote lots of sentences.
I don't think I revise necessarily. I'm almost like tuning up my sentences afterwards, I think, and some more than others. But I like Blindness, you know, because it was so old. I just like, even honestly, and God bless Algonquin for letting me, I was just like, wait, I need to change this paragraph one more time. Whenever I was like, really felt like I was at the nth hour being like, can I just please change this one last thing? But I do think so. I do tune up my sentences. But I often am revising them. You know, it's so funny, Kiese. It's like I wrote these stories so long ago that I almost like don't remember how much I revised. I do revise a lot in different projects, and some of these stories I'm sure went through. Like My Brother at the Station. That was a story where I had written I'd written a whole story, but like probably half or 3/4 of it was what you see, or close to it. And I had workshopped that like literally 10 years ago. And my wonderful teacher, Peter Orner, had read that story and he'd been like, you know, that ending just is not working yet. And like,
Right.
I don't know how to fix it and you will know how to fix it, but so just trust yourself and you'll figure it out. And I was like, whatever, Peter, like, I definitely don't think the endings, you just like don't get, I mean, I wasn't like that because I really trusted him, but I was a little bit like, whatever, like nobody gets my art or whatever. Like it took me like probably 3 or 4 years to look at that and be like, oh yeah, the ending really isn't working. And then years after that, like I just pulled it out of the collection. It wasn't in the manuscript when it went out for submission. And but I pulled it out of the drawer and showed it to my editor, and she'd been like, yeah, I mean, I think there's something there, but it does need some work. And it was then. So that was a story where over the course of like 10 years, my
Wow.
life had changed so much. My like understanding of the world had changed so much. And my sense of, I mean, I think that's like the coolest part about getting older, whatever, is that I just think that like my capacity for understanding or being able to empathize with people and in greater nuance or in greater detail has expanded a lot. And that's great for writing. So I think that there was just like enough life experience, and then I had gained some skill in that time. And I was like, oh, I know how to fix it now. I mean, one of the craziest things is that narrator is pregnant in the book, and then I was pregnant.
Right. Okay.
So then I was like, oh yeah, I was like, she's so tired. She's like following her brother from the train station, and I was just like, in the old draft, I was like, she's so tired. How is she just like quickly, her feet hurt or whatever. So
Yo.
that was really helpful to be able to make.
Okay. We have a, I was about to ask this really, I thought sort of personal question from a Vassar person. Abigail Loomis. Remember Abby Loomis?
I do.
Abby Loomis says, so cool to see you two in conversation. And she literally just asked, I'm curious if Shruti's perspective as a writer changed since becoming a parent. Specifically, was the baby description in The Mourners on page 23 written before having a baby?
Great question.
I'd be all in your business, child.
Actually, that whole story was written before, way before I was a mother. And one of the things I did when I was in revision, where I was like, wait, hold on a second. How old is this baby? Is this baby
Right.
3 months, or is this baby 6 months, or is this baby a year? There's a few babies in this book. And then there was like one point where I was like, I had like so much detailed, like month by month knowledge of what babies were capable of that I was like trying to tune it up a little bit. I still feel like I don't totally know what age that baby is when I read it. I wouldn't know to the month anymore. No, but that was written actually before I became a mother. I think somehow weirdly, and I don't actually think it's like that, like woo, actually. I think many of these stories came true for me in terms of my interests and like the ways that like I was living my life. I was always like interested in these ideas. So then some of the things, I mean, some things more eerily than others, though I can't actually honestly think of an example, but I remember being like, wait, didn't I write that? And then it happened.
I love that.
Then it's because I think that I was just always interested in those things, and so they happened to me. But that story actually, and when my daughter was teething, I was like, too bad you don't have any language, so you can't tell me accurate description of teething.
You don't have any language.
Yeah.
Yo, okay. I'm gonna do something that I didn't ask you if I could do, and you can say no.
Okay.
But I really wondered if you could read the first graph of A House Is a Body, the story. That first graph, yo, if anybody out here listening, read that first graph and prepare yourself to listen to that first graph if Shruti decides to write it. Because I just think that's the perfect paragraph. But I wondered if you could read that graph, and then we're gonna, I think, let everybody go.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great.
All right, so.
Okay. Not the scent of the smoke, but the sight of it. Not the sight itself, but the screen through which it altered the sunlight. She couldn't articulate the change exactly. It's just that the light seemed odd, like the sour light of a nightmare. She had overslept. She was used to waking at the sound of his alarm, risen dazed and blinking into this odd day. The cool and yellow morning. Before she woke the girl, she stood on the deck. I have use of my limbs, she thought, without knowing why she thought it, and went back into the house. She dressed the child and combed her hair and shook cereal into a bowl for her. The child seemed not to notice anything at all, still pliant with sleep, and ate without speaking, but with an unfocused concentration she brought to most tasks. And she brought even to her dreams, her face concentrated even in the task of its dreaming, mirroring perhaps a dream face that rarely smiled. It was too late now to hurry, and the girl ate slowly. The mother had the urge to smack her. She turned her eyes down to her mug of coffee and took a sip from it. Without milk or sugar, it tasted only of acid. Drank. She was coming awake.
Yo, the illest shit is how you just said Drake. Like when I read that shit, I was like, no, she did not just say fucking one word sentence out of nowhere, drank. Can we just talk about that? Like, what the fuck, man? Like, how and why did you do that?
That story, that story, maybe out of any story in this collection, came with that very specific, and that first sentence. I just heard the rhythm of that sentence, and I worked it over a lot, like the phrasing of it, because it's the word sour, the sour light of a nightmare. That was, there's some things because I needed that last little clause, but then anyways, so whatever, that sentence was really important to me, and I heard it the rhythm of it very clearly. And then everything else just followed from that. I think like that, the sentences are very weird in that story. They're very long and very short. And I think I was just like, whoa, okay. That's how you want to be. Let's do it.
Let's go. No, I just want to say, y'all, please, 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 A House is a Body. Love yourself enough to get this book. It is an incredible creation, incredible piece of art, incredible offering from Shruti. I want to thank Powell's for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you after fucking damn near 15 years. And Shruti, it's your show. You want to say anything before we get up out of here?
Oh, I just thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you so much, KSA, for everything, for talking to me, and for all the support. I really appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I'm excited for your next novel, and I just love how you take what's supposed to be normal and you just constantly are always fucking with it in just like profound ways. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you both so much. That was wonderful. It was such a pleasure to host you. And thank you everyone out there for joining us. Please do consider purchasing a copy of the book on powells.com. We hope to see you all at another event soon. Until then, take care and have a good night.